Welcome to the Super Fantastic Exchange, where we have inspired conversations with inspiring leaders. And I am so excited to share with you today Mark Howell. He is an incredible individual, inspiring, and I wanted to connect with him because I'm a fan of his. I've been following him on LinkedIn and just a fan of this guy because he's just so inspiring. He's just a great guy. Guys, y'all give it up for none other than Mark Howell.
Oh, thanks for having me, my friend. I
Yeah, thank
appreciate
you.
that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, like I said, I've been a fan of yours. I've been able to connect with you once or twice, but followed you on LinkedIn. You've got great posts, great content. I just love what you're sharing with the world out there. And so I just knew you'd be a perfect guest here on the Super Fantastic Exchange. But before we get started, Mark, I want to give you a chance to share a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you again for having me. Again, Mark Howell. I have been in this industry of property management for, I've kind of lost count, 26, 27 years, maybe somewhere around in there. I just know I'm very old. I feel very old in this industry. But I haven't loved every minute of it, but I've loved the majority of what I do. And I knew I had a passion for people. I did fall in love with the industry. I spent 10 years working out on site and into a training role with a really great company in the Atlanta market, and then moved into national sales, advertising, then sold training products for the industry. Fell in love with all of the people that I was meeting around the country, and it kind of happened. I had a passion for training, passion for speaking, but really honestly, my passion is for people. Not if, when I leave this world someday, I would love to think that I left behind a person or people that were better after meeting me or had some type of knowledge that led them down a path that made their careers better for themselves or their families. And that's all I, really try to accomplish, is that if I can make one person smarter in the room or more encouraged in the room, then I feel like I've done a good job.
No, absolutely. And I love your perspective that, your kind of your mission or your approach is to add value to kind of create a legacy. So wherever Mark goes, or whatever room he enters, he's adding value. And so when the people get a chance to experience Mark, whether it's a one-on-one conversation or a training session, they get to walk away with something extra, something added value, and it's always going to be positive. And I love that that's kind of your mission, your focus to bring that value and give. It's a very generous approach. And the second thing, I know you and I were talking before we started the show, I simply asked you how you were doing, and you just came at me with, man, I'm grateful. This is a great day. And I love that you have that attitude of gratitude. And it really just come across. And I believe you're on your mission, and it's happening. So it's a great
Thank
job.
you.
So Mark, I love connecting with inspiring leaders and take a peek behind the curtain to find out what inspires them. And so Mark, I reached out to you and I asked you, I was like, hey, well, Mark, what inspires you? You came back with three great points, and I can't wait to dig into some of these with you. So the first one, let's jump into, is communication.
Mhm.
So what is it about communication? This is an interesting one because a lot of people don't like I don't want to talk, let me text. But what is it about communication that really inspires you?
It's interesting. I am fascinated about human nature and communication and people's behavior behind their communication. I will tell you, again, been in the industry for a long time, and I was a little disenchanted with corporate America for a while here after sort of being introduced to people that did not know how to communicate well. It got under my skin, it got into my brain, it got really into my soul, that I said, I'm not connecting with certain leadership groups and people that should be inspiring me. And I had to take a look and say, what's the disconnect here? And I always knew something fundamentally was wrong with the way that we were communicating with one another. Well, I became a coach for an incredible company, the Giant Five Voices, and I learned so much about human behavior, why people communicate the way they do, why we use the words that we do. I've been able to coach some of my clients through what triggers you in conversation, and I was only able to do this because of my own experiences with poor communicating leaders. What I mean by that is it's very disappointing to me when I'm looking at someone that, is supposed to be guiding and leading me and then refuses to say hello or good morning or have any pleasantries. And people underestimate the value of just a simple good morning. For me, and when I do this particular coaching session, there's an assessment you take, and I did find out about myself, like that's what drives me, that's what motivates me, is the pleasantry, the ability to build relationships with another human being. And so when I'm not met with that, what I've realized is that some people's minds are more focused on getting a job done. Like, hey, I woke up at 4 o'clock, ready to go. Where are my numbers? Where's my report? Where is this? They don't really have time for the pleasantries. And so what I was able to find out is that, Mark, you can't kind of just focus on what you need out of the conversation. Yes, I may need for you to stop and talk with me and, coddle me a little bit and say good morning. But a lot of people that I was reporting to or needed things from me, I never realized that wasn't part of their vocabulary. They
Mm,
needed more direct answers from me. So I will say it's very fascinating, though those are still things that motivate me, the pleasantries. I have
mhm,
learned that not everybody needs to spend that kind of time in that particular category. And so I try to evaluate now, who am I communicating to? What do they need from me? Why do they always seem so rushed or so bothered? And now I've been able to say, wow, this person is obviously someone that just needs information, needs the results, doesn't not necessarily has a problem with me, but just needs something from me. So now I
mm.
can kind of give them what they need and move on and not have my feelings hurt. Does that make sense?
Oh, that is so brilliant. And I love how you kind of you package that up at the very beginning is the behavior behind the communication.
Mhm.
And I think that's so critical for us to understand, especially when we're dealing with customers, on site or in the field, wherever we may be. But that also includes our leadership and the people that we work with. That behavior behind the communication is so critical. And I really like it how you talked about now I understand where some people are coming from. When I understand what that behavior is behind what they're saying, it helps you understand that communication
Yeah,
approach.
I'll tell you, I've left organizations in the past because I've looked at leadership and said, wow, these people don't like me. We can't get along. We're not communicating well. I'm not getting what I need from them. And it, again, took me a little bit of time to do this research and educate myself on the fact that, look, people are very different communicators. But, the key to this, Gary, is that once you identify who you are in the conversation, what kind of communicator you are, that's all good and great, but you also need to remember that it's not an excuse for you to continue to behave badly.
Yeah.
Just because, what if I was more of the direct communicator and I didn't necessarily need pleasantries? That doesn't mean that I get to excuse that you may want them. So it's funny because when I'm doing coaching, people will say to me, "Well, I'm this kind of communicator, so I don't want to do all that." And I said, "Yeah, but people need more from you
Yeah.
in able to grow and to be the best part of your team that you need them to be." So you have a huge responsibility once you find out what kind of communicator you are to make sure that you understand what that kind of communication is doing to the other people in your teams.
Oh my God, that's so brilliant. And I think there's a great distinction between normal leaders and not normal leaders because your normal leader is just going to say, okay, this is how I communicate, deal with it.
Yes.
A not normal leader is going to say, hey, here's how I communicate. And I also need to know how my team likes to receive communication. And that not normal leader, the great leader, is going to figure that out and kind of adjust so that their team receives the communication the way they need to receive it.
Yeah, they should. Yeah.
Mark, that is, I love that. I so agree with you. You're speaking my language there. I want to jump into your second point here. And you talk about leadership and vulnerability inspires you.
Mhm.
And you brought up Brene Brown's book, Dare to Lead, which
Yeah, love it.
I've listened to. It's quite some time ago that I've listened to that book, but I do really love. Brene Brown's perspective, but I want to hear your perspective on leadership and vulnerability. What does that mean to you? And unpack that for us.
Yeah, so I had Brene Brown's book sat on my desk for probably months to a year, and I kept wanting to get to it. And finally, I had a client. I said, I was talking to a client. I was like, here are some of the ideas I have for your leadership group. And they chose the Brene Brown book. They're like, let's do that, vulnerability. And I thought, oh my gosh. So I had to really dive into it quickly. But let me tell you, when I did, I realized how fascinating
Mm.
her perspective and her sort of approach to embracing vulnerability. It even starts off in the book asking you, like, what does vulnerability mean to you? And many people will say vulnerability means weakness. It means that you are too vulnerable. Like, you think of this kind of cowered down animal that's being eaten by another larger animal, right? But it's not, vulnerability. And if you know me and you spend time with me, I always kind of, people say I'm authentic. I don't really change who I am in different situations. Even if I need to button things up and try to act, real 100% professional, there's still a little bit of goofy in me. So I let my vulnerability kind of just be a part of who I am, my presentation. But I didn't realize that's what I was doing. For me, it was comfortable, it was natural. But when you think about leadership, and in the book, it talks about vulnerability, blame, shame. And I wrote this class based on her book. I think it's vulnerability, blame, and shame in corporate America. Because let's face it, when you think about the situations that we're all in every day in corporate America, there's tons of blame, there's tons of shaming, but there's very little vulnerability from the people that are doing all of that. And it just creates terrible results for yourself, your teams. But for me, what I loved about it is I resonated with a lot of what was in the book about I gravitate toward people who will show me that they're human. These are my weaknesses. These are my strengths. This is what I'm not good at. I call it raised. I was raised in this industry by some really great leaders, and some of these leaders said to me, like, look, that's not my wheelhouse, but it might be yours. So what can you do to help me make this happen? And I knew that's the kind of person that I wanted to be. I don't want to walk into a room and act like I'm the smartest guy in the room. I'm not. And I will never pretend to be. I don't need to be that. We all bring something very powerful to the table, but in many organizations, there is very, very little vulnerability because there's a lot of ego. There is a lot of, well, I am the best and do what I say. And, it's because I said so. And it's like, nobody is motivated by that. But in some cases, we're sort of a prisoner to that behavior because we need the job.
Yeah.
But I just know when I read the book and I teach this session, it is it is quite amazing to go around a room and ask people very vulnerable questions like what makes you vulnerable in your position, in your organization, in corporate America, and how does it make you feel? And I could talk about this book for hours, but I loved it. It had so much helpful insight on why we shame people
Mm.
because we're unwilling to have vulnerability and show people, look, I'm human. I make mistakes. I didn't know how to do that, or I don't know how to do this.
And that is so true. And I think you really honed in on the word ego, and that's just kind of what resonated with me. Because if you get a leader that has that ego, call it an ego trip, then hey, I'm perfect, I know everything, and then everybody that their team is like, well, we have to blindly follow this leader. I can't raise my hand. I can't ask a question. I have, if I have the courage to say something, then I may get fired.
That's
And
right.
I think that vulnerability and leadership, the authenticity, as you said as well, creates openings for the team to say, hey, I can contribute. Or the leader comes back and says, hey, like you said, I need you to contribute because that's not in my wheelhouse. And I think that creates such a strong team when they're all contributing and collaborating together. And that takes a leader with vulnerability to allow that to happen.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh my God, Mark, this is good stuff, man. I could talk to you for hours on all these things as well.
Let's do it.
I know. Well, let's jump into your third point. You talked about this is an interesting one for me. I've never heard of this, the peace index.
Yes.
So, what is that? Explain to us a little bit about what the peace index is and then how that kind of inspires you.
Yes, I absolutely love the Peace Index. If anyone has seen me at, I spoke about it at GAA and a couple of the other associations at Birmingham, but it is a book that was written by a man that is in this group that Giant. It's a worldwide, it's a leadership series or kind of program, we'll call it. And he wrote this book on the Peace Index. It's actually a tool that I use when coaching with my leaderships and people. And I loved the tool so much that I knew, I was like, wow, this tool is so great. It's 5 parts of sort of going through 5 areas of your life that could be causing you either some type of anxiety or lifting you up. When I take you through the 5 parts, and I have the book here, it's amazing. Jeremy Kubicek. I don't know if y'all can see that, but
See it.
it's a great book. But you go through these 5 quadrants of your life, and we talk about, I'll give you a couple examples. Like some of the quadrants are personal health, is what it's called, but that incorporates your mental, spiritual, and physical being. And so I help walk you through, or you can walk yourself through this. You can go online, you can find out about it, you can read this book, but you basically ask yourself, if I had to, Gary, if I said to you, give me a number from 1% to 100% on how you feel that your life is going in this one category, personal health. So that could be, how do you feel mentally, physically, and then emotionally or spiritually, whatever. Some people don't like the term spiritually, so I call that emotional, right? So if I were to ask you, give me a number, like if you say, I'm probably 75% feeling confident in my physical or personal health quadrant. And maybe break it into 3 parts. If you need to say, all right, so let's look at my emotional health, my physical health, and then my mental health.
Mhm.
Give me some numbers. Give me an idea. Let's do this, and I'll add this up for us. What would you
Okay.
say?
So
Yeah.
start with emotional.
Yeah, you're gonna give me 3 different numbers. Like if you said, I'll give you my emotional stability right now is at a 50%. I'll say, okay, I'm gonna write down your numbers. Then if you said my physical is at an 80%,
Uh-huh.
or my spiritual is at a 30%,
Okay.
I'll let me explain how I did it for myself. I would say
Mhm.
like, I do try to stay in shape. I try to eat well. My physical shape, I would give myself probably like an 85%. I
Okay.
know the things that I can do
Yeah.
better. But I would say my emotional result would be probably like a 80%. So let me do 80, do another 80. But my spiritual, I know I should be doing more. I
Mhm.
know that I could do more when it comes to my spiritual uplifting. And so I always kind of give myself a low score on that. I'm going to say like 35%.
Oh,
So yeah, I know. So no judgment, no
no
judgment.
judgment, sir.
Yeah. So that number is a 195 divided by let me hold on, make sure I get my numbers right. Yeah. So it's a 195 divided by the 3 quadrants. Well, that gives me a 65%.
Okay.
So when you think about it like this, you might have a very high percentage of physical or mental stability. But if there's one of those quadrants that drags you down below that really great benchmark, like mine
Mhm.
does, the 65%, it gives me an overall 65%, but the lowest piece of that was my spiritual health, right? And so I have
Mhm.
to say, what is it that I can do to bring that number up? How can I get my number to be over a 75%? The average number would be like a 75%.
Hmm.
Well, you do this for your provision, your home life, your these different quadrants, right? And so
Yeah.
you end up with a total overall number for a peace index. But what that does for me when I'm working with someone that I don't know very well is I go through these 5 quadrants, I ask them to give me these numbers. And then I can look at that person and I can say, okay, I know more about you now. I know what's either motivating you or bringing you down.
Yeah.
It's quite fascinating because it even talks about your work-life balance, where I
Mm,
could say to someone, if I'm talking to, say, a regional and a CEO, or someone or a manager, and I'm like, tell me what makes you happy every day. The Peace Index allows me this tool to be able to dig a little deeper without you kind of even knowing it, where
yeah.
I can say, look, I've been able to identify some of the quadrants in your life that could cause you problems at some
Ooh,
point. Let's talk about that. But even if I'm not using it as a tool for coaching, any individual can go and learn about themselves. And that's what I loved about this book and this tool, is that I was able to identify areas in my own life where I said, gosh, I really need to focus on that area
mm,
to bring up my total peace index.
yeah. And I think I love assessments. I think there's value in in some pretty much all these assessments, because it's more of kind of it's an inventory, it's an internal assessment. I think the only way for a person to get better is to start internally first before you go external.
Sure.
And I love this approach, the peace index. I mean, it is what a wonderful. And I was making notes, so we'll put a link to this book in the show notes as well, so everyone can
Sure.
take a look at it. But I think that's a great approach to be able to kind of unpack where are you at. I don't necessarily like the word balance, because in certain circumstances there's going to be greater demands on one part or the other, but I think it creates a completeness of, where are you valuing different things, and where are you spending the time on
That's
those
right.
things. So, Mark, I think that's a great tool, and I could see how that would inspire you and give you some insight into not only yourself but the people that you're supporting and coaching in your instance. Um, Great book recommendation. Thank you so
Yeah,
much. As you can
sure.
tell, I love reading.
Yes, I
You
see all your books.
you just added a book to my list, sir. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Well, Mark, it has been a pleasure to chat with you and to learn from you. And so thank you so much. And we're right at the end of our time. But before we wrap up, I want to give you a chance to share a closing thought with us.
Oh boy, a closing thought.
Yeah.
Ooh, you want to pick through this brain. I think if I have to leave you today with a inspiring thought, for me, like I said, anybody that knows me, I feel like you have to find something in your life, your world, that you can truly be authentic with. If this isn't it, then find something that you do love, find something
Mm,
that fills you with passion. Because for me, there's nothing worse than having a leader or someone in any industry that feels phony, that doesn't feel like they authentically care about my growth, my success. And like I've said, people say to me, are you always this happy? Are you always this motivating? No, I'm not. Like, I'm human. I have good days and bad days, but I will say I always look for something that can be positive, that keeps me authentic, that
mm.
keeps me true to what I do believe in my passion. So find something that makes you passionate.
I love it. I love it. So find your authenticity,
Yes.
bring your purpose, find your purpose, combine those together, man, and you will be unstoppable. Mark,
Yeah.
I love talking to you, sir. You just great insight. I love what inspires you, because it really resonates with me as well. So thank you again for being a part of the Super Fantastic Exchange. Guys, thank you for joining us today. Make sure you create your super fantastic and continue to inspire other people as well. Thank you
Yes.
guys so much. We'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you.